Remember speaking in the mics or when we put video up? You will not be saying it.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could all be seated so we can get started here, I'd appreciate it. So I can get Stuart off my back. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lane Lawson. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs for Clear Channel Outdoor, and welcome to VICA's 29th Annual Business Forecast Conference and our Best Practices panel. Clear Channel Outdoor is proud to be one of the track sponsors along with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Best Practices panel. I get the honor of introducing our moderator of the panel today. Our moderator today is Mark Vetter, Manager, Business Operations, Missile Defense, and Strategic Systems for Los Angeles Aerojet Rocketdyne, and our panel sponsor this morning. The biographies of each of the panelists are already in your journal, so I'm not going to go through those and make a very brief introductions. We have Harlan Levy, who's the Government Relations Director for McDonald's USA. Scott Ochoa, City Manager of the City of Glendale. Dr. Michael Shires, Associate Dean for Strategy and Special Projects at Pepperdine School of Public Policy. And of course, Mayor Cameron Smythe, Mayor of the City of Santa Clarita. Sorry about that. Thank you for participating in today's panel, and now let me turn it over to Mark.
Oh, that's noisy. Well, thank you, Lane. I look forward to being the moderator for this panel. At your seats, however, there is an exit survey about the panel. I encourage all of you to fill it out at the end of this session and return it to the VICA staff, an intern, or a VICA ambassador at the back of the room, or you can turn it at the registration desk in the foyer. VICA needs your feedback in order to prepare for next year's event, so we ask you to take the minute or two it takes to fill that out. There's so much happening right now in this state and city that we look at what I'm hoping from this panel on our discussions today on how we can get some of the best practices that we can share with the city of Los Angeles in order to make this a more business-friendly city. I'm going to give each of our panelists a couple of minutes to make an opening statement to get the thing started, and then we're going to ask some questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor and the audience for some of your questions as well. I'll start with Mayor Smythe.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. As said, I currently serving as in my third term, actually, as the mayor of Santa Clarita, although I took a somewhat circuitous route back after previously serving in the California State Legislature, where I realized you can't get anything done. So it's better to come home where you can count to five and actually be more successful in moving things forward. Santa Clarita is very much a changing community, both in population, demographics, workforce, and it's not the same community that I was born and raised in, or that I grew up in, or even that I represented when I was first elected to the City Council back in 2000. But I also say that we are better for that, for that diversity and that change. But what we have tried to do at the city is still, how do you manage that? How do you become a more grown-up city, if you will, while still maintaining all of those values that people want and why people have come to Santa Clarita. Santa Clarita is now the third largest city in LA County, behind Los Angeles and Long Beach. We passed our good city in Glendale.
Not for long, pal.
With our population in the city is about 230 or so, but then you go into the Santa Clarita Valley and you include the unincorporated areas, and we're pushing 300,000. And with other projects online like the Newhall Ranch and others, the valley is going to continue to grow. So our charge is, how do we manage the infrastructure, and all that goes along with that growth. But one thing we did previously, city did a study, or did a poll, if you will, and 80% of the people who commute out of Santa Clarita said they'd be willing to take a 10% pay cut to have a job in town. And that's something that we are trying to really be cognizant of as we look to grow and change our workforce. Obviously, you all know that manufacturing in California is pretty much non-existent now. And so what do we look at? We look at R&D. We look at corporate headquarters. Companies like Sunkist has relocated their headquarters there. You have all the man, biomedical, and those type of industries in the city. So that's been our charge. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to come back to City Hall, is to try to provide that leadership as the city grows up. We're celebrating our 30th birthday, if you will, this year of the city's incorporation. And just a few statistics, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Is Santa Clarita was named the most business-friendly city in LA County. We were rated by Financial Times as the number 4 up-and-coming small city in the country. Santa Clarita remains one of the safest cities in the country. I believe we're in the top 5 with population north of 200,000. We are the 10th healthiest city in the country. We are the 12th happiest city, which I always joke that they obviously didn't poll the people that come to city council meetings, because those are not happy people. We were also voted one of the top 20 cities in the country for kids and to raise a family. And just recently, the assessor rated Santa Clarita as the 3rd most valuable, if you will, in land value in the county as well. And the one thing that all those have in common is it all happened after I got elected. So I take full credit for all of those accomplishments. But again, despite all of that, while I joke, that doesn't happen by accident. We have a great team. We have a great community that really puts a value and prioritizes those values that we try to reflect in the council. So I look forward to learning about from my other panels and to taking your questions. Thank you.
Michael, if you would please.
Sure. Sitting on the borderline of 2 competing cities here, I'll try and maintain some neutrality. Although I will point out I work in Malibu. Enough said. It's unincorporated Malibu, but it's still Malibu. I think this is an exciting conversation because I think most of the interesting things that are happening in government are happening at the local level. And states have picked up sort of federal government disease and decided that it's a time of dysfunction for the most part. I mean, California's been very aggressive. In this last year, we have a supermajority, which makes that easy. Lots of other states have supermajorities, which make it easy as well. And the thing that comes out of all of those is dividing the country. And I think it's very dangerous when you have a supermajority to forget the folks who aren't part of that supermajority. And we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, but there's also a political dimension to this where we see a lot of regions of the country self-filtering. You have a Democratic supermajority, pretty soon the Republicans start to leave town. And I think one of the things that happens at local governments is you don't see that nearly as often. You see a lot more political diversity. You see a lot more inclusion on city councils. And the conversations, even if there isn't as much inclusion as you would like, is open to the concept of minority voices. And there are better conversations in local governments. And so a lot of the problems that we face as a state, that we face as a nation, are being solved at local government levels, because those conversations are happening and there's a focus on problem solving. One of the cool things about elected officials and public officials at the local level is you are accountable and people know where your office is and they know how to get in and they know how to get to talk to you. And that is what makes American democracy work so well. And so it's exciting to see that kind of inclusiveness and conversation. And because of that, some of the more exciting things, and I just want to highlight a couple themes that I see happening in cities in the region, but across the nation even. The first is transparency. Local governments are the first to dive online and to make more and more of their content, their services, their people available online. There's now an entire industry of startups, not surprising, who've come to the table to help cities do that and to help local governments do that. And it's exciting to see citizen access in so many ways and to see so many efforts by local governments to engage their citizens. And so I think that's one of the things where local government and especially cities in the Southland, and some are sitting at the table up here with me, are real leaders in that. I think the second one is investment. The idea, and this was mentioned in the morning breakfast, right, that we can raise billions of dollars of bonds for transportation and other issues and spend that money in a deliberative way that involves input from literally hundreds and thousands of community members. Some of the transportation bills that are going forward, I did a lot of work in the Northeast Valley looking at how the new transportation bonds are going to affect that region. And it's an exciting development to see people investing in their communities. And when you go to them and ask them, they make those investments. I think the third part of this, and this is the hard one for local governments, but because it's hard, I see more and more responses, is the idea of fiscal responsibility. As people become more aware of the finances of local governments are getting real about what the costs are of the promises we've made in the past to our workforce. And the question of pensions has got to be at the forefront of every local government's thinking, dialogue, and budgeting. And you see more and more communities embracing that, and instead of running from it, instead of playing accounting games to get around it, actually sitting down and saying, okay, we have to make the numbers add up. Where's the money going to come from? Where is it going to go to? And how do we sustain our services and provide for our communities in the face of those challenges? And there's a range of responses. Some that I would hold up as examples of fantastic things, and some that I would hold up as examples of, okay, maybe this isn't the way to do it. But there's certainly a lot of innovation happening at local governments because each and every local government has to address those questions. I think a fourth area that Southern California cities in particular, as I travel across the country, are ahead of the curve on is dealing with the question of homelessness as well. I mean, our climate makes it a larger problem here, but I think especially in Southern California, we've gotten much better responses to the issue than you see across the nation. So I think there's a lot of good things going on that we can learn from each other, and I look forward to learning more.
Great, thank you. Scott?
First, let me welcome you all to the annual meeting of the Illuminati. It kind of feels it like it with the light up here up above. Something sinister is not going to happen, I promise you. I am very pleased to be here to share with you about best practices, and at least from the municipal government, and specifically from Glendale, what we think we can do and what we are doing to clear the road for additional investment. So much of what you heard, I think, is very consistent with what you'll find from what Glendale has to offer, that basic business proposition. The idea for us, I think, has really been predicated by way of business development and creating a quality of life, placemaking, if you will, is really on these themes of predictability, reliability, consistency of the process. If I can take your application, if I can take your business idea up at the front end at our development counter and give you a very clear, consistent, predictable idea that you can bank on and how to get through our process, Byzantine, though sometimes it may look and feel and actually be, but I can get you through it, I think the better off you're going to be. Your needs and expectations, the variables, and your success really start to come back into focus. However, that said, I would tell you and challenge all of the other cities that are out there, and challenge you who do business with cities, is to add a fourth theme to that mix, and that's urgency. You heard in the morning, and you hear it every night on various news shows, that small businesses are the backbone of this economy, of this country, of the whole 9 yards. You can recite it, I'm sure, in your sleep. If that's true, then the people that deal first and foremost with those small businesses are the cities. And so to the extent that you have a process, a decision-making process that will allow for that private investment to come into your community or into your region, is critically important to our collective well-being. You've seen the state this past year, for better or for worse, and it's sometimes better, and in some cases worse, put forward a very aggressive program, body of laws related to housing creation. You are starting to see and hear that also with commercial investment, and which would allow us to leverage that commercial investment. There are trade-offs there, and those trade-offs will come in the form of regulation, adherence to CEQA, or the modification, God forbid, of CEQA in that process. I will tell you that that road is a difficult one to walk, because what you also saw this morning is the extent that development has really taken over and taken hold of California, especially in Southern California. And if you go to the 88 cities of Los Angeles County, my guess is every one of those cities is going to tell you that their residents are sick and tired of development. They're sick and tired of gridlock. They're sick and tired of traffic and having to commute. The problem is everyone thinks that they have it worse than everybody else. And so to the extent that there is enough of a reality check among elected leaders like Mayor Smythe and his folks who have a bold vision up the hill from us to be able to say we can manage exceptional services, public services, and yet still adhere to a vision of growth that, again, allows the development to come in, allows that private investment to come in, and as long as we're smart about it, we can leverage off of that private investment. I think that's one of the key ways that you will get to a successful place by way of reconciling with some of the pension promises, quite frankly, that Mr. Shires had referenced. That is very real. It will crowd out services if we are not careful. We are at a pivotal moment in time, and to the extent that our strategic advantage is being able to be nimble and answer and address some of these issues, it's going to require a little bit of letting go and allowing people on the front lines to make some decisions for us to speed up and accelerate the investment that will generate the value, generate the investment or spur that investment further that will then trickle back into the local economy and strengthen our hand. That is extraordinarily important for us, and I think that if LA, as the 800-pound gorilla in this part of the world, can do that and set that tone, and all of the rest of the cities can follow along, as a region, we will be absolute world beaters. You saw this morning California as a function of international GDP, where we rank. I would submit to you that LA County is the equivalent of for the entire state of California. We have that capability if we have the courage of conviction, the strength of character to move forward and make those decisions. So we will be happy to share that which we know and hopefully learn from all of you by way of the insightful questions that you have. And again, welcome to the Illuminati.
Great, thank you, Scott. Harlan.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me here. Thank you, Vika, for inviting me. Let me pull this closer. Can everyone hear me now? Is that better? So, as the Government Relations Director for McDonald's, it's real important for me to be able to speak to members of both parties and be bipartisan. So, as you'll notice, I'm wearing a blue suit and a red tie. So everybody is included. I figured I would kick this off with just giving you some numbers about McDonald's, kind of start at the world, and then kind of get it down to a more local level. So, everybody, I'm assuming here, knows McDonald's. We are the largest restaurant company in the world, with about 36,000 restaurants worldwide in 128 countries. In the U.S., we have 14,058 restaurants, and 93% of those are franchised, so owned by small business owners living and working in their communities. Total employment under the arches, as we call it, over 800,000 employees in the U.S. In California, we have 1,300 restaurants. Again, 93% of those are franchised, so the same percentage California as U.S. Getting it down to a more local level, in LA County, we have 120 restaurants employing over 6,000 people. And in the city of LA, we have 91 restaurants employing about 4,550 people. So we've got a relatively large footprint, no matter where you are in the world. We look at California as a very important piece of our market. Approximately 10% of our U.S. restaurants are located right here in the state, and we get a lot of our produce from the state of California. I'm just going to throw some numbers at you. In 2016, which is the last year that I had numbers for, we purchased over $219 million worth of produce from the state of California. That's incredible. I mean, that's one of our largest suppliers of food that we have in the U.S. Included in that number are tomatoes, strawberries, soybeans, raisins, onions, lettuce, milk, cucumbers. So we're buying a lot of your products here in California. We are embarked on what we're calling our Experience of the Future. Those of you that have been to a restaurant lately, you've probably seen, we've got the new self-ordering kiosks, we've got table service, we have McDelivery. You can order McDonald's on your phone, it'll come to you in 15 minutes or less. So we are really moving forward into the new age. Right now in LA County, we've got about 60% of our restaurants are modernized, or what we call Experience of the Future. That is one of the highest percentages we have in the U.S., and that reflects on sales. People like our new restaurants. So as a result, this region is one of our top performing regions in the U.S. And again, we see that as a direct correlation to the new Experience of the Future. The goal, by the year 2020, every restaurant in the U.S. will be a new modernized Experience of the Future restaurant. So that's pretty much it for my intro. Again, it's a pleasure being with all of you here today, and I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to start asking us some questions based on what I was hearing, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to answer the questions, and as you answer, please speak into the microphone. We are recording it for prosperity, so if you would do that, please. Mayor, you mentioned that in the city of LA that manufacturing is almost non-existent, and being a manufacturer at Aerojet Rocketdyne, we are besieged with a lot of the changes of government making it very difficult. So how can cities be strategic about the type of business or industry they're seeking to attract, and also importantly, how do they retain them?
So I think it takes some forward planning, and to be aware of how the economy is changing. What is the workforce looking like when they're coming out? What are the needs of your employees? But we struggle in California as a whole. As cities, we can do as much as we can, but we can't do anything about CEQA, OSHA, minimum wage, all of those things that are statewide or countywide proposals. So that becomes a challenge for cities. One thing that we're struggling with is the entertainment industry is kind of the bread and butter of Santa Clarita, including Santa Clarita Diet, which it's not totally true, everything you see on that. But that's always been kind of what, how we've always been able to rely on. And most of a large number of our residents are employed by that industry. But again, because of regulations and competitiveness from other states, that industry, continues its migration out of California. And so, how are we trying to retain that? One of the things that we do is we partner with our community college, College of the Canyons, that does a lot of workforce retraining. And so people that don't want to leave, but they want to get into the new workforce, they have opportunities to take the real, quote unquote, real world training that is necessary. We have the #1 art school in the country in CalArts, and so it continually churns out Oscar-winning, Emmy Award talent that we want to try and keep and retain in the city as well. And like I said, what we're trying to do really is look at R&D and corporate headquarters, where people still want to be in California, still want to be close, because like a Santa Clarita or Glendale even, we're trying to help companies recognize that just because we're not in Los Angeles, you still are you have access, to all the infrastructure, whether it's rail or the ports, so that you can still have your products come to the second largest metro area in the country, but you don't have to be in Los Angeles. You can be out in a Glendale or a Santa Clarita and still benefit from that. So we have just kind of started branching that out as well as we look to recruit not only from the country but also internationally.
Okay, good, thank you. Scott, I have a question for you. You talked about development, and I know in the valley where I reside that the master plan for all the development is 50 years or so old, and there's a concern of pay to play for developers. And so that kind of brings up, you know, it's a good policy to attract businesses and development to the city, but there's always a pushback from residents. What can cities do to balance these pressures?
I'm glad you got that one.
Is there anything they can
No,
do?
it really, I tell my city council all the time that they set the tone. And that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on your city council. If you have an elected group of folks and a politic in that community that has some longevity, some continuity, even if they are relatively new, but they see the same vision over a longer period of time, we can move forward together into that future that was master planned, tweaking things along the way because nothing stays static. The idea that somehow cities are doing something behind closed doors, recognizing there are a ton of bad actors for whatever reason along the 710 freeway. But there are a number of bad actors who are out there. At the same time, the degree of citizen activism vis-a-vis technology and the internet and social media has made it such that you really can't sneak anything by if you're at least adhering to the basic laws. So with that being said, I think councils can and should take advantage of that fact to have some courage and to have some conviction to say this is what we believe is in the long-term best interest of our community, moving it forward, understanding that that is not a nice, easy soundbite, and that all of the context that goes along with that awesome land use decision-making authority that cities have is the thing that really will decide in the next 20 years those cities that fall behind and those cities that move forward. Councils can't be swayed. You heard all the NIMBYs. You guys all know what the cave people are? The citizens against virtually everything, right? You can't adhere to the cave people or the banana people. You know them. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody, right? Yeah, that's the NIMBYs 2.0 and 3.0. Councils, good councils, understand that there is a place for that input, and there's a place within the law and the regulation and the process, but we still have a vision to go towards. And so it all comes down to who are you following?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Michael, you talked about the lack of political diversity, say at the state or even in the large metropolitan area of Los Angeles. Individual cities are extremely impacted by the neighbors' actions or even the state's actions. How can cities deal with this in their economic development plans?
Well, I think there's two things that you have to think about. And my example was that local governments are doing this better than other levels of government. I think that one of the dangers we have, and you kind of heard it this morning, is in a community that's leaning one way or the other politically to not listen to the voices of those who disagree with the majority. And I think that local government, I mean, it takes leadership and it takes intentionality. I think that there are aspects of the process, of the political process, that guarantee that, public input. But I think there's also the receptiveness to ideas, and you see this much more often in local governments because it's about problem solving. It's not as much about politics. I'm not saying there's not politics. But it's about solving problems because that's what creates the political results that gets elected officials reelected and that get city managers the kinds of support that they need to move ahead. I think, for example, in the city of Los Angeles, there's a huge opportunity, tying back into the question for Mayor Smythe, about manufacturing. It's one of the last places, the Northeast Valley is one of the last places in Southern California where you have a large workforce that can be trained and who wants to work in those kinds of jobs, and you have real estate that hasn't yet been converted to commercial purposes to actually bring manufacturing to the region. Sun Valley and some of those regions in there have all these brownfields, have all this real estate, and all we have to do is think about how to zone in a way that's creative and protect industrial land. This is one of the most important things for Southern California. If you want to keep any of these jobs left in the region, you have to protect industrial land in that planning process. And I think that those kinds of questions are not partisan. You don't have to worry about it because people want the jobs, they want the opportunities, they want to live in the city that they're working in. The other piece to this that's been missing so far, I think, for LA that needs to be focused on is building enough transportation infrastructure into these regions. And I'm not talking necessarily about highways, just high-level bus service into some of these areas that could be manufacturing centers, bringing the educational institutions like the models we see in Santa Clarita, which have been extremely successful at least retaining manufacturing, bringing the community colleges and the colleges into these communities. And it's these kind of partnerships. And it's a focus on problem solving that gets us past the partisan divide. And I think that's true not only at the local level, which I think is the model where this happens, but it could be true at the state and federal levels too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's put down some notes for our next question. Harlan, you talked about McDonald's, 36,000 restaurants worldwide, 1,300 in California and 120 in LA County. So clearly McDonald's knows how to expand. The question I have for you is when businesses are looking for sites, what can cities do to really attract those new businesses and retain the existing ones?
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're not building a lot of new restaurants now. We're focusing on, modernizing our existing restaurants, but we are building a few. And I think, the biggest attraction for us is speed to market.
Can I ask you to get a little closer to the mic?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I said the biggest attraction for us when we're looking at competing sites is what is the speed to market going to be? How long is it going to take from when we start the process to when we finish the process and we have a store that's open and selling food? We do have a long-term real estate plan, and we have to work within the parameters of that plan. We look at available land. We look at the different costs associated with developing that land. How far along is it? Are there some entitlements or not? So there's a lot of factors that come in. But with respect to how the local government can help, it really falls into that speed to market category. And there's certain things that some jurisdictions have done that have really assisted us, and then we would go back and, because we had a good experience, we would look at that jurisdiction again very favorably. Things such as giving us a dedicated planner, where we've got one person to go to that knows, what the process is for us and what we need to do, and we don't have to talk to different people every time we go to the building or zoning department. An expedited permitting process. If we talk to a jurisdiction and say, we're going to do all this development in your community, we're going to spend, X $1 million doing all this work, but we really want to make sure that we can get it done quickly. Can you give us an expedited process? So that's something that helps. And then, predictability. Knowing that if we do X, we're going to get outcome Y. And not having to continuously, in a land use process, changing of the goalposts, having to go get, more studies done or more information. Once we want to know that, if we do X, we're going to get it done. We're going to get the result that we want. So those are all very helpful things that jurisdictions can do.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to toss one out to the audience. Any questions you would? Yes, ma'am. Okay, let me just repeat that question. So you are looking for, for new businesses, what are the three top things, for existing businesses, I'm sorry. For existing businesses, what are the three top things that can be done to help retain the businesses, and they will critique your answer?
I would say keep your cost of service as a municipality as low as you can. Keep quality services, especially the ones that you, your employees, and your customers want and need, and find a way to work on mobility. Traffic is real. Maybe it isn't as bad as it is in other places of the world or even the region, but we do need to solve some of those problems.
So I would agree with the mobility component, and not just getting to the freeway or that, but just within the city,
right.
And being able to get so people have access to get to their businesses or to work. I also think still people want to feel safe. They want to know that especially if you're a small business, they want to know that they can lock up at night and know that their business is going to still be there in the morning. And then I also think ease of expansion. A lot of small businesses want to maybe open up a second building, or they've outgrown their current and they want to relocate and stay in the city. But if you go to a planning desk, you know that you got to do your TIs and you got to do the upgrades and make that as easy as possible as well, and as cost effective. Obviously you have to pay your costs, but you want to make it so that they're not spending everything just to get themselves up and going and they get priced out of it. So I would say again, mobility, safety, and ease for expansion.
The dangers of going third. I was going to say transportation and public safety, but I think some of the others, a couple things come to mind. One is infrastructure. I think having reliable and accessible electric, gas, water, and highways, streets. It's not just about transportation, about moving people around. It's, how big are the potholes in front of your business? How available is parking and things like that. I think to the extent that you're serving if you have businesses that are serving local communities, it's also about the quality of life in the community, the kind of amenities that the community offers, and protecting and sustaining those. I think if it's, and I think I can stop there because I don't know if there's a lot of industrial cities kind of represented here, but to the extent that you're looking at industrialized communities, it's obviously that those kind of core things like data infrastructure and things like that new businesses increasingly need to have, that local governments can partner to help expedite.
How'd they do?
Well, at that point, I have to first put in a disclaimer. I'm an attorney, and
That's it.
clients. And it seems that where they got stuck, because they're already established businesses, is where they have maybe 5 to 40 employees, and all of a sudden they get something for unemployment benefits, or more recently, wage and hour law claims. Somebody didn't get their meal break, or didn't get their lunch break. And sometimes it's very expensive for them to hire a high-quality attorney like myself to deal with those issues. And I would think that if they had a site to go to, like the local city website, where it gave them a how-to handle some of these things, it would be much easier for them, because a lot of businesses have employees, and in California, if you have over 5, you're subject to all of the fair employment and housing rules, and they don't know necessarily what to do when an unemployment claim comes in, or when a wage and hour claim comes in. Even maybe having, attorneys volunteer to help answer questions on the phones, or just something that helps businesses and employees, I would think is important.
Okay. So really having a place to go. And I can give you just a couple quick examples where I've seen working with building and expanding in the city, working with the city of LA, which is difficult as Chen, but they've been very helpful and supportive, and providing us with some insight into the building and the permit process, and having someone assigned that we can go to. That made life much easier. The other thing I was going to comment on, the cost. I did some work with Sun Valley and Tahunga Chamber of Commerce's, and the businesses there, they want to expand, or new businesses, and it's very difficult. They have space, land, buildings, all that stuff, and the biggest complaint is the LA business tax, and they rather go to Pasadena. So cost is a big factor as well.
They don't want to go to Glendale or Santa Clarita?
I know, what's up with that? We don't even have a business license tax, so.
This
for
Pasadena,
the
I don't see
record.
Pasadena sitting here. Wait, so,
And this was years ago, so.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
It was before you were.
that makes more sense. Yeah, before I got elected, that makes more sense.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm also an attorney, and my question relates to my nuclear household career. So right now I'm in public-private partnerships, and I'd like to know if you're all open to those. And the second part is environmental real estate land use. I know about entitlements in the law states, and do you believe that that will hold up public-private partnerships and make them not go forward?
So I'll jump in real quick on the P3s.
Before you do, I did want to just at least repeat it so it's on the record that we, are you open to public and private partnerships? And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So, absolutely. And again, it's increasingly difficult for cities to have significant again, smaller cities like a Glendale, Santa Clarita, to have, to be able to do it on our own. So for example, just earlier this week in Santa Clarita, we officially opened our first full affordable housing complex. And that was done, again, with a combination of, the city contributed upwards of about $5 million because through our general fund. Also, we donated the land. We had some redevelopment funds still available that we had to, that we needed to spend, and through some CDBG money. But that's not going to get you there, particularly when you're talking about an affordable housing project and the costs that go in there. So again, partnering with those private companies that specialize in that was an example, and it's now, I said at the opening that changing the narrative of what affordable housing can and should be, and it's a beautiful place. You wouldn't think it's affordable housing, and it was done in that that private partnership well, and as well when it comes to all the other amenities, whether it be parks, roads. We just don't have the money to do that ourselves, and that's where you kind of get in the catch-22 that everyone complains about traffic, but the only way we're going to really build more roads is with either a tax component, or you're partnering with new development and require that infrastructure to be built. And so that's always kind of the balancing act that that councils have to deal with is, right, you get all the complaints about the traffic and then you do something to do it. Well, you shouldn't. You've now just added more to the problem. But I think the P3s is really a key component of a city the size of Santa Clarita to really provide all those amenities that we're known for and we like to brag about.
I would say yes. Cities, especially those cities that have a good track record with appropriately using the redevelopment laws as they existed prior to 2012, are probably good candidates for P3s. They have a culture of being willing to look at things, to flip the script, and try to be a true collaborative partner versus just cooperating with the private market. Those cities can work with you. I will tell you that more and more cities are having to look at P3s for not just economic development deals, but as the mayor points out, also for housing. And I think increasingly you'll see that for quality of life amenities and possibly even some infrastructure, especially as we go forward with stormwater permit costs when that comes to reality. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, but I think the P3 community is also hurt sometimes by folks that call themselves P3, which are basically just looking to write a city to take the city takes the cost, takes the risk, and the private partner takes the gravy. And so I think that to the extent that that community can police itself and really have that best practices mentality, you'll help yourself.
Did that answer your question? Okay.
Depends on the city council. If you have that council that shies away from anything related to those citizens coming out, development is difficult. A P3 is more difficult because the cynics that are out there that want to hate on anything that is innovative and creative are going to say it's just a giveaway. And so you have to have a group of elected officials that have the stones to say, no, this is why this is in everyone's best interest.
Okay, good,
And understand it.
Next question.
How much time do we have left? So I cover a 26-state region. I'll focus on Southern California. Sure. And every jurisdiction is different. Even within Southern California, you've got different outlooks, different philosophies, different leadership. I think the number one thing for McDonald's is to put a local face on the brand. Whenever we deal with local governments, we try to bring our franchisees in. They are the ones that are living and working and paying taxes and creating jobs in that community. I mean, I'm a corporate guy. They don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from the local business owner. So that is essential. We try to bring them in, and they talk about their situation. They talk about their own personal stories. Many of them started working as crew behind the counter and have worked their way up and are now, owning restaurants. Many of them are in the communities where they grew up, attended high school. So that is key, to create that local connection, and then let them tell the story. What is it that is the problem? Why are we in today? Well, it's because, the situation is making it difficult for, whatever. The Department of Transportation wants to take away access, or there's a situation with homelessness. Whatever the case may be, the local face is key. The local face, the franchisee, make them the spokesperson for the McDonald's brand.
Okay.
Thank you. Absolutely.
All that good stuff.
Question in the back.
Hi, another question for Harlan. I'm from Northern California, and in San Francisco, we have a lot of hostility with formula retail, limiting the number of, say, McDonald's that cities can have. Do you see that down here in Southern California, and how do you react to it? How do you handle that type of position?
So we haven't seen as much of that down here. That is a San Francisco thing that we deal with. And, we have to deal with it. I mean, it's, the city has that policy, and, we have to, we don't have a lot of restaurants in San Francisco. In the whole city, I believe we only have about 15 restaurants. Compare that to the nearly 100 restaurants we have in LA. So, it creates impediments for us if we want to, grow and expand and do certain things, but, we deal with it. It's, and again, similar to anywhere else, we make sure that when we're talking to the local officials there, we're bringing in the San Francisco owner-operators. And every one of our restaurants in the city of San Francisco is franchised. There are no corporate restaurants there at all.
Okay. I'm going to ask over here.
Question for Mayor Slaney. So I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, and I remember back in 06, 07, housing was going nuts, huge developments of new residential housing. And obviously, a lot's happened since then, the recession, a lot was placed on pause. Starting to turn around, the economy's going back up. What does it look like in the city right now in residential housing? Are businesses taking as aggressive of an approach? The reason I ask is, I remember being younger and just seeing a whole bunch of plots of land that were paused and just concrete was laid out for 2 to 3 years and nothing was happening. So I'm curious what's going on in the city right now with new residential housing.
So I think when you say 06, 07 was when you were younger, that makes me feel really old. And secondly, the second most important question, what high school did you go to? Oh, so, wow, you are young. Yeah, wow. Yeah, wow. I should not have asked that question. It makes me feel even more old. So yes, so that is true. A lot of there was a lot of projects were entitled and improved, and then as the economy stopped, then that you saw that pause button being hit. And yes, it is picking up. The challenge in Santa Clarita is because a lot of the development now is actually outside the city limits. When you talk about a Newhall Ranch project, which is 20,000 homes that was recently approved, that's a county project, and that was approved by the county. And but yet the caves and bananas come to City Hall, and think that we're responsible for that. And so that's always a delicate balance that we've had with the Stevenson Ranch, Westridge, all of that development that wasn't in the city initially. But you're seeing if you go to our planning department, they give reports, and the queue of businesses that are wanting to open up, particularly in our what used to be our redevelopment area. They are still lining up to open up, and they're all, kind of as we were talking about, not, they're small business people who grew up in Santa Clarita. They live here. They want to have a business, and it's just their own, whether their own retail, their own brew pub, and so that's been really good to see that. And then there have been a couple residential developments, particularly on the up the 14 freeway, so the Canyon Country side, we had just approved a project that is taking an old, really dilapidated mobile home park that is being revitalized into a project with restaurants and some residential, and we actually had no local opposition at the council meeting. We had about 15 speakers, and they were all in support. And now some of that is a testament to the developer, who had well over 100 community meetings, and did the legwork necessary and took the input. I think, as we talked about, took the input from those who had concerns and really incorporated that. So by the time it got to the council after the multiple planning commission hearings and others, it was ready to go, and the council had very few amendments to the project, because the work was done before it got to us. And again, that's a unique situation where you took what was a real negative in the community, and now you're going to change it up with some higher end retail and restaurants that people really wanted. And so you're able to have that benefit. But that's kind of where we're trying to see is turn that development around in some of those parts of town where it's been a little bit tougher over the years.
Yes, sir.
So I had a quick question actually for all of the panelists. We all talked about mobility being an important part of how you attract businesses, how you make a successful community, and yet there's this focus nationwide on complete streets and really bottlenecking commuters. So what's your definition of mobility? How are you perceiving mobility going forward?
I think,
And I'm
yeah.
particularly interested in the contrast between business, education, and the cities.
We look for a degree of balance to the extent that you have these nodes that the complete street movement, the placemaking, the new urbanism really comes to focus. But the spokes between those different nodes are as clear and as easy to navigate as possible. So our large arterials are in good shape, infrastructure is maintained. To the extent that you have freeways, that we work with our partners at Metro to make sure that they are as efficient as possible, and hopefully through Measure M, you'll see actual real transit moving through even the built-out environment of Glendale, be it through the BRT on the freeway, or even utilizing existing assets like the Metrolink Heavy Rail and replicating light rail service within that right-of-way, even if they do move forward with the high-speed rail. But the idea is, you have these locations that are very identifiable and unique, but the ability to move between them is where we really try to get folks, where they need to be as quickly as they can.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Let me just jump in real quick. I think, it's all connected. And I know, Mr. Lindenheim can attest. Santa Clarita is struggling right now because of the road rehab and the work that's being done on the 5 freeway. And so as a result, more people are now cutting through town, trying to avoid that crunch, both in the morning and during the afternoon commute. And so it is then incumbent on the city to make sure that those arterials and others are in as good of shape as possible, because they are getting a little bit more use than they would have. And we have a hotline, an app where people can report the potholes, and so we try to get those done within 24 hours. It's we kind of subscribe to the kind of the broken window theory, that if you don't attack it right away, it completely changes the dynamic of a community. I'm getting a little off topic, but between potholes, graffiti, the city spends over $1 million a year on graffiti removal. And again, we have an app for people to report that graffiti, and we have our graffiti team that gets out there, and within 24 hours of the report, we'll take that down, and we try to do the same with our roads and our road rehab. But because of what's happening on the 5, that's creating more challenges from mobility. And I would imagine again, a company like McDonald's that's getting their produce, that's got to have some impact on them as well from the time perspective, and meeting their schedule. So we see it as all connected, even though sometimes it's the state that's doing the work. It still is going to impact the city, and I'm sure Glendale feels the same way if it's the 134 or others. When the highways are impacted, then the streets are as well.
I was going to ask, and I'll get you next. Ma'am.
Good morning, my name is Shirley Vivian with Glendale Community College, and I'm representing the Career Services Department. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about, we're talking about this pathway forward, and at an educational level, we're a little bit more focused on this career pathways for success, not with students in mind. And I kind of want to shift the discussion, if you don't mind, and ask you this question. Some of you mentioned, but if you can elaborate a little bit more on, does your organization partner up with community college or career centers, specifically in mind with pathways for success for students? And do they offer internship programs? Do you support that? Would you like to see more?
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, Santa Clarita does. With our College of the Canyons has that. We have the college has a university center as well. We have they've opened up a culinary institute, which is again, it's a great community event that you can you come in and you have a tasting once a week. You make reservations, and the students come in and just make their 7-course tasting menu for you. It's the hottest ticket in town, so to speak, to get in there. And just programs like our welding program, at College of the Canyons is completely impacted, because as we know, not every kid is going to do a 4-year stint, and so if they can get a trade education in 2 years in their hometown, and if you look at what welders make, fresh out of school, I mean, there's you can write your ticket, you can go anywhere in the world, making 6 figures, when you get that once you get your certification, and so that's kind of what we're trying to do, is recognize not every pathway educationally is a 4-year graduate quote unquote white collar type gig, and so we want to have our students that are coming out of the high schools to have whatever options they want, and if they want to do that 4-year path, they can start at College of the Canyons. If they want to do the trade school path, they have that access there as well. And my wife is a teacher at the college, and you see that just continual growth and expansion that you see as a real viable option. And with the cost of 4-year universities now continuing to rise, a lot of people, that is their only option. So it's important that the community colleges are prepared and funded appropriately to meet the needs of the growing number of students.
Great.
I would just tell you, the Verdugo Job Center, we're blessed to have the Job Center and the WIB in town. They're a part of the city, so the degree of collaboration with the college, and our college, and Verdugo VJC has been instrumental. So we do have an intern program. It's pretty robust. I will tell you that a lot of times the interns are coming from 4-year universities, but we have been extraordinarily fortunate in getting good, cheap labor, and these folks, the younger folks that are coming into the system, are actually carving out a place for themselves inside of our organization and beyond.
And that's a good point. That what we're struggling with at the city is we're reaching a level where a lot of our employees are starting to retire. Like I said, we're at our 30th birthday, and there is a large number of people that have been with the city for 20 plus years and have moved up the organization, and they are at the retirement level. And these are people with the long institutional memory, and so it's important that we tap, whether it's interns or recent graduates, and bring them into the city system so that they see the benefit of that, and we can start building our new workforce, because that's something that we're struggling with at the city, is finding sometimes the people that are willing to do the city jobs, and then those that are, do they have those qualifications? So for us, it's the dream to have someone that's grown up in Santa Clarita and started out playing in the youth flag football leagues, and then work their way up and be now be an employee of the city. Because again, I think we're all probably facing that with manufacturing and others, as the workforce is starting to to really change, and it's going to change as people start to retire at a much greater rate than we've seen in previous years.
Yeah. I think there's a, excuse me, I think there's another layer on this too, on the education side, which is most of our four-year institutions are using an educational model that's targeting workforces that are at least decades old. And I think community colleges have really been kind of the entrepreneurs in this space to connect with employers and what the labor market needs from college graduates and to build those. And going back to the question about P3s, it's almost a P5 model because you have multiple publics, right? You need the community college district, you need the government, you need those involved. And then on the side, especially in issues like housing, you also have the nonprofit sector. And so, it's not just a public-private partnership, it's a bunch of publics and a bunch of privates kind of working together. And so it's this bigger model, and I think higher education really has dropped the ball here in a lot of ways. And like I said, I love community colleges because they've been the entrepreneurs, and whether it's Glendale or the College of the Canyons, I mean, there's some fantastic programs in those. Most community colleges are now in this space where they're working with local businesses. But if you want to do economic development and you want to bring new employers or new types of employers, I mean, there's this wonderful statistic in research, in employment research that shows that something like a third of the jobs we have today didn't exist a decade ago in terms of the job description. And when you think about that, higher education institutions are not very agile at the four-year level, and it's really been the community colleges that have tried to step in and fill that gap. But even then, it takes a lot of leadership, and it takes a lot of collaboration, and quite frankly, it takes a lot of support from the private sector to help these institutions figure out what those new jobs look like and what the new skills are.
Great. All right, go right ahead.
So I just wanted to mention McDonald's has a program called Archways to Opportunity. Every McDonald's employee is eligible, whether they work in a corporate setting or in a franchised restaurant. Since 2015, we've had over 17,000 people go through this program, completely free to them. It's got three components to it. The first is if you are a non-native English speaker, we will teach you how to speak English. It's called English Under the Archways. No charge to the employee. It's a class. We teach you English. Second thing we do is if you want to get a high school diploma, not a GED, a real high school diploma, we will pay for it. You just have to apply, and McDonald's picks up the tab. Third, if you want to get a degree at a 2 or a 4-year university, we will offer you tuition assistance. And I just have some numbers here. In the SoCal region, which is the region we're in, which is the whole Southern California area, we've given out $157,000 to our employees for tuition assistance. This is a program, I mean, it's such an amazing program. I wish we publicized it more. I wish more people knew about it, but we're doing it, and we take it seriously. We want our employees to have these opportunities. I think you have to be an employee to be eligible, but I can check on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have this gentleman that's been waiting patiently, but I'm going to...
It's actually related.
Okay. I did want to make a statement, though, that we are getting close to the time, so if we have to cut you off with the answers, so
He means us.
be very concise.
He's warning us, not you.
You talked about the aging workforce, and I've heard you talk a little bit about training. I'm just wondering whether you were preparing your communities for the disruption that's about to happen in technological innovation. Automation, artificial intelligence, autonomous driving, all of these innovations are going to have a serious impact on the future workforce. I know you talked about what we're doing in
I will tell you that we are just now doing that. This current fiscal year, starting in July, we have stood up a new Department of Innovation, Performance, and Audit. So we always had an internal audit function, but we know that technology is something that has to be actually leveraged as the force multiplier. And on the one hand, we don't want to overshoot the idea of getting folks ready for the next generation of jobs when some of those jobs just won't be there. Now, it's an interesting dichotomy where we say that we have to be prepared for different forms of transportation. Certainly, autonomous cars are one of them, and in Glendale, probably an autonomous car would be a welcome to what we have now, because we have some bad drivers. But the idea that perhaps parking structures, that land use decisions, and parking ratios, the width of streets, wider, smaller, whatever the case might be, all will be disrupted and impacted by some of these innovations. The hard part is your mind may be in the future, but your ass is still here in the present, and trying to get council members who are responsible to those constituents who maybe aren't thinking or want to even think about, because it's too scary, thinking about the future, getting those council members, those policymakers to say, we have to be ready for that is kind of where we are right now. We're at the very beginning of that, and that kind of dynamic tension that exists is going to be quite a struggle. It may be the question for local public policy of the next generation.
One more real fast.
Private wealth advisor for U.S. Bank Private Wealth Management. So my clients are the high net worth and ultra high net worth. They're paying multiple bills. And so my question kind of dovetails a little bit on this question in that in my experience over the last 25 years, I'm seeing a financial demographic shift of those with the high net worth, ultra high net worth are starting to really respond to the punitive tax and expense aspects of the state of California, and in particular in Southern California. And so we're also seeing a demographic shift of the workers, and we're seeing that split. We're seeing the numbers of the ultra high net worth are concentrating wealth, and we're getting more and more of the lower end. The middle class is shrinking. From a legislative perspective, or a city perspective, or a growth perspective, how are you guys planning for that? Because from my vantage point, it's going to get really, really rough to pay for all these extra services for all these extra folks who aren't paying bills.
And I'm so sorry, but I want to mention that we are out of time. So if I can give you a minute or two to answer.
We can't answer that. Sorry about that. We're out of time, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Because I can see this being an hour answer, you know?
So I'll just jump in briefly. A lot of that, where I see the concern for the city is how that change is going to impact the state, because the state revenue is so heavily dependent on income tax and personal income tax. And so as you continue to see, like you said, the high wealth folks react to that. I always tell the story about how the Serena or the Williams sisters, Tiger Woods, for example, I mean, those are all California kids, that at their height, were probably billion-dollar, franchises or industries, if you will, themselves, but they all picked up and left to Florida a long time ago. And you're going to continue to see that. So when you get that, then you have less state revenue, and I'm concerned about the continual take of local control away and being put into the state. And they continue to do that. And as revenues tighten up, the state is going to look for other pieces of revenue. A perfect example is the redevelopment money. I was in the legislature, and that had zero to do with any policy whatsoever. The legislature needed money. And so the governor and others used redevelopment, saw that as a good pot, talked about how corrupt and ineffective it is, and used that to end redevelopment agencies. It had nothing to do with the policy of them. It was purely a money grab from Sacramento, and you're going to continue to see that erosion. And so that's where my concern is.
Okay.
I would tell you, just the last point on that would be that the question will have to emanate from Sacramento by way of the revenue sharing among layers of government. Sales tax, retail sales, online sales, talk about disruptive technology, is killing brick and mortar sales. And so increasingly, sales tax revenue that makes up a third of most cities' general funds is going away. And so what is the asset that most people have, that most people want to protect, and is guarded by those folks that are the highest cost tools in our arsenal, public safety, it's going to be their property. And so to the extent that we look at different ways to generate revenue that aren't necessarily beholden to the income tax and aren't as volatile as the sales tax are going to be the future of how we solve some of our problems in the state.
Well, thank you. And as soon as that question was asked, I'm thinking, and you might want to keep that to the next session is off the tracks, because you think of people in that category with high income, if they move to Texas or Florida, they can effectively buy a new car every year and not cost them a thing.
But then they live in Texas. So.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this panel. Aerojet Rocketdyne is... And Aerojet Rocketdyne is thrilled to be a sponsor of the panel, and our track sponsors, Clear Channel Outdoor and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, thank the panelists one more time with a round of applause. Thank you for taking the time out today and joining us. Please make sure you fill out that survey, hand it to one of the VICA staff members or outside to the registration desk. Thank you.
The bad legislation panel. I'm Lane Lawson, the Vice President of Public Affairs for Clear Channel Outdoor, one of this morning's track sponsors, along with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I get the honor of introducing our moderator and panel today. Our moderator today is Ruben Gonzalez, President of Gonzalez Strategic Affairs, the sponsor of this panel. The biographies of each of the panelists are already in your journal, so I'm going to take a very brief moment to introduce each one. To be first, let's see here. The first on the panel is Assemblymember Vince Fong. We'll have Mark Jaffe, Senior Policy Analyst for the Reason Foundation. Susan Shealy, columnist for the Los Angeles Daily News, and Dan Walters, journalist for Cal Matters. Thank you for participating in today's panel, and now let me turn it over to Ruben.
Thank you, Lane. Before we get to it, a little bit of housekeeping. At your seats, there is an exit survey. VICA staff actually tortures moderators until all of these surveys get in. So please, for me, fill them out, hand them to one of the ambassadors or VICA staff in the room, or you can drop them off at the registration desk if you can't find one of the ubiquitous VICA staffers. They're everywhere. Say hi, Liz. As someone who's made a living at bitching about bad legislation, I felt it was incumbent upon me to sponsor and moderate this panel. But a lot smarter people, more insightful actually on the panel. So I'm going to kick it to them to start and just get quick 2 minutes each, just kind of your broad perspective, approach, experience when it comes to bad legislation overall or in the recent session. We'll start with Assemblyman.
Since I probably had the front row seat to everything, let me say just real briefly, thank you for the opportunity to speak and to participate in this panel. I'm probably the one person that, well, compared to these fine people, that probably, they've been watching the legislature longer than I have. But certainly, the legislature's out, so we can't do any more damage for the time being until we get back into session in January. There is no shortage of bad legislation. The laundry list is pretty extensive, and we can go into the specifics if you like. But I believe that right now what's facing our state, the biggest issue is affordability. As I travel up and down the state, up and down the 5 and the 99, and you talk to ordinary Californians, I mean, they won't specifically say affordability, but they'll hint around it. Their utility bills are going up, the electricity rates are going up, their water bills are growing, their transportation costs, food costs. They go to the grocery store, they look at they can't afford to take their kids to family vacation, and all those things hint around affordability. The challenge for a lot of us is that the rising costs in everyone's daily life is driven by Sacramento. But to get them to focus on those causes is a major challenge. Just for a quick factoid, in this legislative session alone, over $373 billion of taxes and fees were proposed. I mean, just take that, just try to wrap your hands around that. And that's just taxes and fees. I mean, that's not the regulatory climate. That's not the things that are the other bills that are coming down the pipe as well. So for me, that's going to be the lens I think that all of us should be focusing on is, do these bills, do these ideas, do they make life more affordable for Californians that live and work in the state? So I'll stop there and I'll let the rest of the panel continue.
With 5 seconds to spare, thank you, sir. Susan, the advantage from the Fourth Estate here in Southern California.
Well, if I could change one set of laws in California to help the economy, to help the people of California, I would look at the climate legislation. Not because climate change isn't happening. If you assume that it's happening, if you assume that it's going to be really catastrophic, and if you assume that it's all our fault, it still doesn't justify the legislation and the actions that we're taking in this state, because what we're doing doesn't do anything about it. All of California is 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We could shut down the entire state. It would make no difference. But what is it costing us? Gasoline is $1 a gallon more in California than the national average. Electricity rates are 30% more than the national average. The cost of everything that's impacted by the cap and trade law is higher in California. Food, clothing, everything that's transported, everything that's made or moved in California. We have the highest cost of living. We have the nation's highest poverty rate. And what are we accomplishing with that? What are we accomplishing? Are we doing one thing for the temperature of the earth now or 200 years from now? We say we're showing leadership. Who's following? Who wants our 20% poverty rate? Who wants higher gas prices? I would look at that legislation, at dialing it back to a more sensible level, to a more cautious level, to a more prudent level. It would be like a tax cut for the entire state. It would help the economy. It would help the budgets of all the agencies that have to buy gasoline and everything else that's more expensive. It would help the housing situation if we weren't so worried about vehicle miles traveled and we could build housing developments more easily. I think that is the one thing we could do for California that would help everything.
Thank you, Susan. Mark?
You know, we think about all the bad legislation that came out this year. You often forget about the bad legislation from previous years, so I wanted to go back and review one of the old hits, which was last year's Senate Bill 3 from 2016. That's the one that raises the minimum wage, ratcheting up each year until in 2022, it'll be $15 an hour for businesses employing at least 26 employees, and then 2023, it'll be $15 for all the rest. But that $15, that's the sticker price that you get at the used car lot. It's not the real cost of hiring somebody. When you add in Social Security tax, Medicare tax, federal and state unemployment tax, employment training tax, covered California employer shared responsibility for those who don't provide employee health insurance, and then finally compulsory sick pay, which also came in with SB 3. If you add all those things up, that $15 turns into over $19 an hour. And when you consider that in California, we have a lot of people who are not very well educated because of our failing public school system, and often haven't developed really great interpersonal customer service skills. A lot of people, it's just hard to figure out how you can make use of them and earn back that $19 an hour that you have to pay them. And it's even more than that, because employees can take advantage of litigation opportunities. If they, for example, don't get the right number of coffee breaks, they could be filing a complaint with the state or pilfering merchandise. So even $19 underestimates the cost, and then the benefit for a lot of employees just doesn't really add up. So what we're seeing is an acceleration of a trend that we discussed in the last session here, which was automation. So I live in the Bay Area. We have this eatery called Eatsa. In Eatsa, there's no wait staff. There's nobody at the counter. You use an app or you use a tablet at the restaurant. You type in what you want, and then 3 minutes later, a cubby hole opens and your food is served to you. So that's like what we're seeing elsewhere. We're seeing with I go to Target now, the number of self-service aisles has doubled. Or Amazon replacing Barnes & Noble or other brick-and-mortar bookstores. Everything is becoming self-service, automated, wiping out a whole series of entry-level jobs that help people get on the first rung of the ladder, learn customer service skills, get educated, and then maybe, yes, one day making a quote-unquote living wage. So I think that's, especially for this audience of business owners, I just think that's a really terrible thing and something we just have to keep an eye on and hopefully change.
Thank you, Mark. Dan?
Mark, if you're as old as I am, you'd remember that back in New York, many decades ago, they had the thing called the automat, which did exactly that, so it's not exactly new technology. Although I was in Pismo Beach last week. Why was I in Pismo Beach? That's a long story. I was in Pismo Beach, walked into a McDonald's to buy my favorite McDonald's grilled chicken sandwich, and I was confronted with a robot. It's an experimental that McDonald's is experimenting with in a couple of places. Happened to be one of them in Pismo Beach, and you do all your ordering right there on that robot right there inside the door. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. But in all seriousness, the $15 an hour minimum wage is something, it's an experiment. It's kind of interesting to note that when Jerry Brown signed the bill, he said something to the order, "This makes absolutely no economic sense, but I'm going to sign it anyway." Which, if nothing else, demonstrates the essential irrationality, I guess you would say, of politics. We call it political science, but there's nothing scientific about it. It's kind of like a dark art form, if truth be known. But what I want to do is be a little bit of a contrarian here and talk about the other side of the equation, is what's not being done. Because it's easy to write, it's easy to observe what the bad things that are done, or even the good things that are done, but it's very difficult to divine the bad things, the things that aren't done. As a columnist, I can do that, and I would put on that list such things as not doing something about CEQA, for example, not doing something about the runaway costs of public employee pensions that's the reason I was in Pismo Beach, by the way, is what the effect of the pension situation is having on local governments. City managers all over the state, I can attest from talking to a bunch of them, are scared out of their wits about the rising pension bills. They're looking at pension costs going to, for policemen, going from the current 50% of payroll up to 75%, and then possibly as high as 90% within a few years. They're not doing anything about that. The housing crisis, kind of tokenism, not really doing anything about that. And so on and so forth. There is a kind of a syndrome in the Capitol I have called in print half-a-loafism, which amounts to you take a swipe at something, you do a little something that you can put a press release out on and then forget about it the rest of the time. And we've seen a lot of half-a-loaf sort of situations that really don't deal with the issue. We saw a half-a-loaf pension reform bill a few years ago, for example. We've seen half-a-loaf efforts at education reform. We've seen half-a-loaf efforts at the housing crisis. I think as much as people dislike that gas tax, that's basically a half-a-loaf situation at a very huge backlog of transportation deficiencies in this state. And that's one of the really serious maladies of modern politics is that you can do a half-a-loaf thing. You really have no long-term effects on it. For example, the housing bill, by their own count, will amount to about 77,000 housing units over the next 5 years, over the next 5 years, we need another 400,000 housing units.
Dan, maybe we can get some.
So anyway, I've gone on too long. But half-a-loafism, what's not being done, is as important as what is done.
I never like to interrupt Dan, but if I don't, Stuart's going to automate my job. So
I can be a robot.
I always refer to the legislature and dealing with some of our local governments as facing a death of 1,000 good ideas, because it sounds great, but funding it or implementing it doesn't make any sense. Are you finding that with the supermajorities in the legislature that we're getting more of these somewhat painful good ideas?
Certainly, it's just mathematics, right? There's 25 of us Republicans, and then there's 12 in the state Senate, and so for us to stop a number of things. We've got to build a blocking majority with moderate Democrats, which it's up in the air how many exist. And so that's going to be a long-term challenge. And so if we're looking politically, we are obviously going to try to find a way to grow our numbers in the legislature. So the one thing that was one of the surprising things of this session is when the rules were approved for the Assembly and State Senate, they actually increased the number of bills that we can introduce. So it was 40 last session or last cycle, and then now we have the opportunity to introduce 50 bills in our 2-year cycle. And so I'm not exactly sure that's a good idea. We probably should have stayed at 40, maybe even reduced that a little further. But yes, the fact that there is a super majority in both houses, it makes it very difficult, because now there's no incentive for them to negotiate with us. They're going to try to jam. I mean, you look at everything that has been done, maybe minus cap and trade, but when it came to housing, when it came to the gas tax increase, all those things are jammed through. And while we have the 72-hour rule now, basically they can change anything they want in 72 hours. So they can get the board equalization in 72 hours within the budget. They can do anything they want, and so that's a real big challenge for us.
Is anyone seeing any other impacts of the supermajority?
I think the supermajority has not been wildly used so far for one reason. It has had an effect on certain issues, but the Democratic majority, supermajority in both houses of the legislature are not monoliths. And in fact, on a couple of very important bills, they could not have gotten them through without Republican support. The cap and trade being one example, the gas tax being another. So they were not able to use their Democratic supermajorities in those particular cases, nor in many other cases. That's why so many of the, for example, tax bills fell by the wayside. There was, whatever number, $400 billion taxes, but a very small percentage of those actually made it through, because the Democrats have supermajorities, barely, but they can't really always wield them. And one of the reasons they can't is that there's a significant block of moderate Democrats in the Assembly and even in the Senate, a certain block, that make their presence known. You will not find their effect in voting records, because very few of the bills that die because of that mod squad, as they're called, die without votes. The State Chamber of Commerce has been fairly successful in killing off all the bills that they label as job killers. Over the last almost 2 decades, they've killed 90% of the bills that they put on the job killer list. And that held true as well as this year, even though you have a very liberal legislature, because of the existence of the mod squad. You will not find those bills in voting records. Those bills, if they don't have the votes, they simply drop them. So it's very difficult to see that influence in graphic form. But believe me, it's there, and it's a moderating influence. Another moderating influence on the legislature is the governor. Who would ever think that Jerry Brown would be a moderating influence? But he is. And Jerry Brown 2.0 is a moderating influence. He vetoed a number of bills this year that he thought were just kind of over the top. Probably the most over the top bill of the whole year he vetoed was one saying you couldn't run for president in California unless you show your tax returns. Well, that was aimed obviously at Donald Trump, but Jerry Brown hasn't been showing his tax returns either, so he couldn't very well sign that bill. But it was an over-top bill. But there is a moderating influence in the Capitol, despite the supermajorities, despite the obviously liberal tone of the legislature. The Mod Squad, Jerry Brown, have all been kind of moderating influences on what goes on in the Capitol.
I'm going to stay with you, Dan, then I'm going to ask the rest of the panel to respond to this. Seeing the impacts of bad policies, maybe we don't see the ones from this last session because they haven't been implemented, but of past sessions. Does it have any impact on the election cycle? I mean, we're now a little over a year out. We're in the run-up to 2018. Will it actually impact races? Some of the negative outcomes from past bad policies.
The greatest influences on the elections next year for legislative seats are going to be, number one, turnout. The turnout of voters in non-presidential years is generally very low in California. In fact, it was a record low in 2014. That's why Republicans, how the Democrats won supermajorities in 2012, high presidential turnout, lost them in 2014, low off-year election, won them again last year, high presidential turnout, and now we're going to be in another off-year cycle. That would work generally to the advantage of Republicans and possibly flip over one or two of those seats, Democratic-held seats, that have flipped back and forth several times already during this decade. But there is another influence that's going on, and that is what it's called resistance. In other words, the Democrats are waving the bloody shirt of Donald Trump at every level, even running for dog catcher. It's elect me dog catcher and I'll resist Donald Trump. He's going to try to take away your dogs. And so that may offset that. That may drive a higher turnout in 2018 than normally would occur. 2014, the turnout in the general election was only about 46%. In a presidential year, it's like 70 to 75%. I don't think it's going to get down to 46%, but where between 46% and 75% it exists will determine a lot of the outcomes, and that 2 or 3 or 4 legislative districts that will then determine whether the Democrats retain their 2/3 supermajorities or lose them in next year's elections.
If I could just add to that, I think one thing that Republicans can do to make matters worse for themselves in 2018 is to sort of go back to some of the anti-immigration messages that we saw in the 90s and again with Trump. I mean, this state has really changed. It's no longer a majority Caucasian state. And Republicans really are going to need to have policies that talk to the electorate that we're facing today, as opposed to what it was like in the 50 or 60 years ago. So it's really important to have a more inclusive message, but also one that's fiscally responsible.
As Mark speaks, though, however, Mr. Bannon is speaking to the Republican convention down in Anaheim. He's the star speaker at the Republican convention in Anaheim. So,
not good.
Good luck on that, Mark.
Yeah.
Susan?
Well, the other side of the Republicans moving to the right, or appearing to, is that the Democrats are courting the progressive left, because that's where the energy is, and that seems to be where a lot of the fundraising is right now. And because the voters, in my opinion, the Democratic voters in California, it's something, 45% of the registration, they are not all progressives. They are not all on board with higher taxes. They're not all on board with a lot of the, even the immigration agenda that the progressives have. Many people who are registered Democrats are not progressive Democrats. And while it may not make a difference in the 2018 race itself, the campaigns in 2018 may prepare the ground for candidates in 2020 who are more moderate. They may find a willing audience in the Democratic registered voters.
Well, as the lone Asian American Republican, I guess, on this crowd, certainly the turnout in 2018 is going to be the key question, and Dan's right. Enthusiasm is hard to measure right now. The liberal left is motivated with the resistance movement. We do have a motivation on the Republican side because we have majorities in Washington, D.C. I traveled a week ago with the vice president and the majority leader, Kevin McCarthy, and the amount of enthusiasm and resources being raised were record amounts. So if we get out of the bubble of Sacramento and we travel up and down the 5 and 99, the races that we are going to be competitive in is where there is a large percentage of people that feel they're forgotten. If you look at Stockton down to Riverside, there are 2 Californias in this state. And if you're looking at my community in the Central Valley, blue collar, working class, Sacramento has not focused on them. In fact, they've drawn a gigantic bullseye on the industries that feed and power our state. And so when we look at the gas tax, when we look at public safety, as Susan mentioned it before, everything that is being passed in Sacramento is being spread, the costs are spread onto ordinary people. And so those costs are being borne by hardworking people who have to pay gasoline. And we're going to see a 12-cent increase in November and a 19-cent increase in diesel. We're going to see the vehicle license fees go up, and those are adjusted for inflation. And when they find out that 30% of that money is not going for roads, people are going to be upset. And so the recall and everything else, we'll see if there's an electoral consequence. I think that'll be the first true test. But if the election revolves around affordability, on local issues, on public safety, on their pocketbook, then I think Republicans will be successful. If it is revolving around national issues, then I think that we have a bigger challenge. But in my view, right now, the public is waking up, and we're beginning to see that once we get out of the bubble of Sacramento.
This next question, I'm going to start with Susan, but again, everyone else can weigh in as they like. If I had a nickel for every time I stood at a podium or in front of a reporter and said that these bad policies are business unfriendly or driving businesses out of the state, I'd have a lot of nickels. My question is it true? Are we actually seeing an impact where businesses are leaving on the whole? And if it is true, what kind of changes do we need to make to stem that tide?
Well, there are two things to look at. One is whether businesses are leaving, and the other is whether they're not coming in the first place. And when you look at a situation where businesses like Amazon want to open a new headquarters with 50,000 well-paying jobs, and California's going after it, it's very vivid to see how uncompetitive we are. We have higher energy costs, we have higher gasoline costs, we have higher diesel costs, we have higher water costs, we have a constant drone coming out of Sacramento that businesses are not paying enough. There's this talk of splitting the role for property taxes. I don't know that Amazon would consider anything in California just on the rhetoric that comes out about property taxes because they want 8 million square feet. And I don't think they really want to hear that they're going to lose the Prop 13 protection on commercial property. That's a big thing. It hasn't passed, it's only been discussed, but every time an email comes out talking about that, people hear that. People hear that message and they say, California? California? Get me a jacket with wraparound sleeves before I'm in California. And I think you have to look at there are business consulting firms that talk about where to locate. They always look at housing costs, they look at energy costs. But when you look at everything in California, including the income tax for high-earning employees, people don't necessarily want to work in California. They don't necessarily want to move to California. And I don't think businesses want to expand or locate here. And it's all man-made damage, and it can all be reversed.
Can add to that. I don't know the business numbers, but certainly with respect to the population numbers, California is definitely seeing net out-migration to places like Texas. Texas is a place with no income tax. Texas is also a place where the legislature only meets every other year and is capped at 140 days. So I think it's interesting. In Sacramento, we have a lot of entrepreneurialism, and as Representative Fong said, we have now the limit going up from 40 bills to 50 bills. We have a lot of highly motivated people in Sacramento who want to prove that they're doing something, and they're creating a lot of laws. But somehow Texas gets by with a lot less in the way of new laws, and in fact, Texas is eating our lunch right now.
I think you have to, ever the contrarian, you have to also put in the mix, however, that California now has record low unemployment. Record low unemployment, about 4.7%. It hasn't been that low in the living memory of probably anyone in this room. And personal income keeps jumping. So something is going on there. Is California a difficult place to do business? Yes, it has extremely high costs. And I think if there is a real Achilles heel to the California economy, it's probably housing costs. The ability to recruit employees who can't afford to buy a house or even rent an apartment. That's probably it. But so far, the state is not doing so badly economically. Yes, we're losing more to people in other states than we're gaining from other states, but we're still gaining people from other states. The number one destination is Texas. The number one destination for Texans is California. So there is something going on there. But we could kill the golden goose, certainly. But I think housing costs probably are the key to the thing, because from housing costs flow all the other things in terms of wage increases and all the other stuff that goes on. But so far, California has dodged that bullet. Interestingly, maybe illogically, it has somehow dodged the big bullet on the economy.
I would just question about using the unemployment statistics, because we've got a lot of people who are out of the workforce. I mean, there are in Los Angeles tens of thousands of people on the street I don't really think they count in the unemployment statistics. They're just not in the workforce.
Right. Those have dropped out of the workforce. I mean, I would just quickly say that productivity has gone up. All of you, I'm sure, have found ways to do more with less, and so I'm sure the economy has been resilient in California for a very long time. The challenge is going to be that if you look at the state as a whole, our entire economy, in the past, I would say like maybe 5 or 6 years, has been driven by the tech sector and the Bay Area. That they are still growing at a positive rate, just not as fast as they were. So if you're looking at as they slow or as they reduce, normally other sectors of the state economy pick up: agriculture, tourism, aerospace. They are not growing as fast either, and probably a lot of those industries are stagnant, and they are being weighed down by taxes, fees, regulations. And so if the tech sector doesn't continue to strive and expand and other industries struggle, then we are going to have a situation where, from a budget side, from a revenue side, we're going to have some major decisions we have to make in the moving forward, because if we're going to brace for a recession in the future, that's why we're going to have it.
And one more thought on the job creation. I believe the statistics show that the bulk of job creation is in the low-wage sectors, not the high-wage sectors. So then you get into a question of what is a job? We're creating jobs, but you can't live on the minimum wage 20 hours a week. It's not going to work. It counts as a job created, but it's not what the Gallup organization calls a good job.
Which goes back to affordability. How are you going to afford to buy a home or
And
travel?
what Susan really points out to is that California has become and is increasingly a two-tier society. A lot of opportunity and wealth at the top, a lot of need for unskilled labor at the bottom in industries such as agriculture and tourism, for example, construction, but a kind of a declining middle class. And that certainly is an issue going forward. We're not alone in that, certainly, but it's very stark in California, where you have an economy that's generating $2.5 trillion of personal income, but at the same time has the highest functional rate of poverty in the United States, largely due to housing costs, by the way. Then that's something that is probably unsustainable. You can't have both of those things at once. And in the end, something will have to give. And we get right back again to, I think, the most pressing issue facing California today, and one which will dictate its economic future, and that is the housing crisis. We need 180,000 units of new housing a year to beat population growth. Yes, our population is still growing by about 300,000 people a year, mostly babies. And we need 180,000 new units of housing a year. We're building 100,000. We're 80,000 short. Over 5 years, that's 400,000 short, on top of the shortage we've amassed in the last decade, which tells you why rents and prices have gone up so dramatically. I, as a homeowner, appreciate it in one sense. On the other hand, it's if it's not killing the economy, it's certainly crippling the economy. And by the way, the worst housing unaffordability problem is not the Bay Area. It's Los Angeles. Because even though the Bay Area's housing costs are higher, its personal incomes are also much higher. As a result, the biggest squeeze is being felt in Southern California, where families are having to spend 50 or 60 or 70% of their incomes just to put a roof over their heads. That's going to kill us in the long run, because people are not only not going to come here, they're going to go away. They're going to go to where even the college graduates are going to go someplace else where they can afford to buy a house. And so that, in the long run, it exacerbates that two-tier economy and is the Achilles heel of the California economy if we do not meet that housing crisis head on.
I was on the phone with one of Susan and Dan's colleagues from the LA Times the other day, and she was ribbing me about this. It's always hard to explain, in a position when you're advocating for business, that all these increased costs and these policies and these fees and measures like JJJ and Measure A and the costs they bring are all damaging. And then the reporter throws back at you, as has been talked about in this panel, well, we have the lowest unemployment, we have the fifth largest economy, we have these numbers of businesses coming in. And I kept trying to explain it, and I finally landed on an analogy. I asked the reporter, I said, do you remember in your past life, before you were married, that man or woman that you dated because they were just so attractive, but they were really high maintenance? That's California.
That's California.
It's really, really attractive. Infrastructure, weather, customers, ports, airport, everything. It's really, really attractive. And it's just the relationship that every resident or business has with the state, and at some point, what does the maintenance and the cost of that relationship outweigh the attractiveness and the shine and the benefits?
Yeah. Well, there's actually another metaphor. It's almost the metaphor of the swimmer, which is swimmer comes in against everybody else and they always win. And so at some point he's like, oh, it's unfair. So we'll put some anchors on the swimmer, and then they still win. So you lay on more and more anchors, and then after a while, the swimmer doesn't win, and everyone says, well, that guy doesn't swim like he used to. But instead of just taking the anchors off, we're piling on. But a telling statistic, and this is a polling I've seen, is someone was they polled Californians asking, do you believe your children's future is better out of California? And for the first time, over a majority of Californians believe that their kids' future is better if they leave the state of California.
Right. And by anchors, you mean CEQA, right? We don't need to get into that.
PAGA, all, you name it all.
Mark, it looked like you had one last add-on you wanted to?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think at this point I'll open it up to questions from the gallery, and let's drive a conversation further. Ted?
So as Ruben mentioned, we're coming up to the one-year mark of the 2018 November election. But before we get to the November election, we're going to have the full year of the second year of the legislative session. So my question is, looking into your crystal ball, what do you think are going to be the biggest threats to the business community that are going to come before the legislature next year? The fight that we should be prepared to fight next year. I think what you're really asking is this: what does the other side want, right? And how likely are they to get it? Well, the other side wants more, and they do want higher taxes. California is about maybe, depending on the data used, third or fourth highest taxing state in the country. But we're aiming towards number one. I just finished a long article on this point. We're taxing state and local taxation at the rate of 12.7% of personal income. That would put us number one on the Tax Foundation data, but that Tax Foundation data is a few years old. So we may be number one, or we may be still number four, or something like that. But we're right up there, whatever it is. Somebody mentioned that several $100 billion of new taxes were proposed. They'll all be back in one form or another. We've probably maxed out on the income tax, 13.3% highest marginal tax rate. We're maxing out very quickly on the sales tax. We're at 10% or above in many localities. And they're finding resistance at the local level in adding more very often. The next big battle over taxes will be, as somebody mentioned earlier, the split roll. That's probably the highest agenda item for the liberal coalition of labor unions, particularly public employee unions, social service group advocates and so forth, education advocates. They want to do something on the split roll. They want to separate out business from things. Now, that would be difficult to do. They talk every election cycle about putting in a split roll measure on the ballot, but it never happens for one reason or another. But it's up there as kind of the holy grail. It would produce, conceivably, depending on how it were structured, maybe $5 billion, $10 billion more a year. But again, it depends on how it's structured. But they would have to go on the ballot. It would have to be approved by voters. I don't think they can muster 2/3 vote in the legislature to put it on the ballot, because it's a constitutional amendment. It'll have to be done by initiative, probably, if it's going to be done at all. But I think we will see, within the next few years, a serious effort at split roll. It was stalled the last time out because they put all their resources into extending the temporary income tax brackets for another 12 years, essentially making it permanent. But that's been done now, and I think you will see a split roll. It'll be proposed in the legislature, but it's not going to happen in the legislature. It have to be done by initiative.
Mark?
Another tax that we might have to worry about, not necessarily next year, but over the next few years, is extending the sales tax to services. You've seen that in think tank reports before. That would be really bad for California service providers, especially small businesses. One thing that's I think a big danger, that's not specific to businesses, but just generally to the fiscal well-being of the state, is the single-payer health care, which failed this year, although it was passed by the Senate. And, the thing is, you can have single-payer health care and you can have single-payer health care. In some countries, it's not bankrupting them. But this particular bill, the way it was structured, it was just a complete dog's breakfast. So first of all, you had the idea that it was going to be strictly fee-for-service. So in California, we have about 25% of people are in Kaiser. Kaiser would have been wiped out by this. And Kaiser does a good job, relatively, of controlling costs. So that would balloon the cost of that. And the second thing is, there was really no restriction on people moving into the state and just getting health care without having previously paid any taxes into it. And we can, as I said a little earlier, we have to be careful about some of the anti-immigration rhetoric, but we don't have to worry about people coming in from Mexico or Central America to get this health care. It might be someone from Nevada or Oregon or Arizona getting this health care. So to have something that was so fiscally irresponsible, it had a back-of-the-envelope calculation of $400 billion as the cost, but I want to emphasize that was a back-of-the-envelope calculation. The LAO never looked at it. I can't even believe that something passed the Senate without the LAO actually doing that kind of analysis. It's just unbelievable. So I think
you can't believe
they're going to come back. The nurses union is all in on this. They have been excoriating the more moderate Democrats who didn't want to push it forward, and I think that's just a huge threat to the state.
It's also going to be probably the dominating issue of the
governor's
four-way race among the Democrats for governor. In fact, they're having their first debate sponsored by a huge healthcare union in Anaheim on Sunday. It's probably the leading candidate, Gavin Newsom's all in on it. And it's part of a larger syndrome of the resurgent left wing of the Democratic Party in California reacting to Trump, reacting to Republican Congress, and then putting candidates on the spot. Jerry Brown doesn't have to worry about it. He's not going to have to face the voters anymore. But those who aspire to be governor, even those of more moderate leanings like John Chung and perhaps Gavin Newsom, feel drawn in to endorse that agenda, the most important item of which being universal health care, not necessarily single-payer health care. They're never going to do that. Universal health care. And so you'll probably see whoever the next governor is going to be a Democrat. Probably to the disappointment of some people in this room. The next Democratic governor is going to be probably committed to the idea of universal health care in California. And $400 billion is probably about a right estimate. You look at the UCLA healthcare numbers that are now being spent, that's probably about right. You pull in undocumented immigrants into the system and so forth, it's probably close to $400 billion. About $300 billion is being spent now from various sources, mostly governmental sources. Government pays for 70% of the health care in California already. So there would be another $100 billion bill probably to make it universal.
The way I see it is all these programs that are coming down the path here becomes a major revenue discussion amongst the liberal left in Sacramento. And so that's why you're going to see this quest to split roll, Prop 13 changes, oil severance tax probably will crop back up. And so as the legislature pulls left, and while I appreciate the sentiment that some people feel that the mod Dems actually are moderating force, they are only in certain circumstances. And so I've worked with a lot of the mod Dems, and they are squeezed because a lot of times they feel like they want to have, and then so they'll change things on the margin, but they won't have a real big impact in the full discussion because who's going to stand in the way of 55 of their colleagues, right? Or 45 or 50 of their colleagues when there's only 5 left of them. And so, but the one thing that's not very sexy, which I think is something that will continue to be discussed, is just labor laws in California. I think that as we move forward, whether it's PAGA or other things, every aspect of the employer-employee relationship, if you left it to the guys, to the will of this legislature, they will want to regulate it. And so that's something that we're all going to have to be very, very wary about, is because that's something that doesn't get a lot of attention in the media, but it's something that will, over time, put a lot of businesses out of business, because they're just going to try to, whether it's mandated scheduling, or you pick your issue. Those issues don't get a lot of attention, but they'll jam those things through the legislature, and they don't need a 2/3 majority.
Susan?
And the governor's willing to sign those bills.
On that subject, there is some good news. The Supreme Court is going to hear a case called Janus versus the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and this is similar to the teachers' Friedrichs case that was decided as a split decision in the Supreme Court. And if they come down on the side that public employees cannot be forced to pay dues to their union, it will have a big effect on the amount of money that comes into public employee unions, which they're currently using to one extent or another to influence legislation. And so that will be a positive balancing effect in California politics, which are so heavily dominated
Big game
by
changer.
public employee
Big game changer.
spending. On taxes to watch out for, I would watch out for water taxes. Not just taxes, but increases in fees, because between trying to reclaim stormwater and clean up groundwater and the twin tunnels and turning off the pumps because of the Endangered Species Act rulings in court, all of those things are going to have an impact on water bills and taxes.
On that note, there is actually a water tax being proposed. It's something that is stemmed from cease and desist letters from the Central Valley, but environmental justice groups have been suing, and so they're trying to negotiate some type of settlement. And one of the parts of the discussion is a straight water tax on everyone's water bill.
And one more quick note, there was a bill that passed that was sort of an agenda for spending on child poverty, and that is probably tied to a future proposal for a property tax surcharge to fund child poverty programs. So keep an eye out for that one.
Just a quick elaboration on one of the points Susan made. The legislature anticipates this ruling in Janus. So as a result, they passed a law that unions will now be able to have a compulsory seminar with new public employees just after they're hired. So they can't force them into the union, but they can get an hour of their paid time to try to really push them hard to get in.
So it's the state version of card
This
check.
is a super downer of a panel. I mean,
The legislation is actually a little more onerous than that. It allows the public employee unions to have access to the personal contact information of public employees, but prohibits anyone else from having that information. So, because they feared that the right to work or anti-union groups would start campaigning among employees to eliminate their union memberships, assuming this court decision comes down, which everybody assumes it's actually going to go that way. It was going to happen that way until Antone Scalia died, and so it was undoubtedly will happen now with the new justice. There's another Supreme Court decision that everyone's waiting for in the Capitol, and that's one before the state Supreme Court, and it has to do with the so-called California rule that supposedly mandates that once public employees get pension benefits, they can never be changed. And the appellate courts have ruled that, yes, they can be, but the California rule is really not as rigid as everybody's always assumed it is. If that decision comes down and upholds the appellate court, it would actually empower government employers. This is, 1,000 battles will break out all over the state as employers try to negotiate new contracts that might protect pension benefits yet earned but reduce them for future employment. And this is going to be a huge battle all over the state if that decision comes down. So the Supreme Courts in both capitals are being watched very, very closely for a couple of really key decisions. Certainly the union people are watching them, because if they lose both of those decisions, it does change the atmosphere tremendously.
Okay, let's get to the next question. Fernando?
Yeah, Maya, this whole discussion is really fascinating to me, but the idea that there's going to be political relief for businesses, no matter what you come up with, is just not going to happen, because the trends politically are for even more progressive legislation. So, may I actually challenge
until they get the bill for it. Okay. Well, I can only speak from my personal experience talking to voters in the, you have data, but I was out there in the San Fernando Valley where the voting record was extremely progressive and the registration was extremely democratic. And I spoke to people about their utility bills and their property taxes, and I did 25 points above registration in an assembly race. So there is a market on issues like rent control. When you talk to people who own apartment buildings for retirement property,
Well, let me.
it is a small percentage of voters,
Oh.
but there.
Today in California, there are more households with pets than with children. I do feel moved to respond to you on the poverty rate. There are two poverty rates. There's the official poverty rate, which everybody realizes is totally out of date, and then there is the supplemental poverty rate that takes into account the cost of living, particularly housing. And by the supplemental rate, California has the highest poverty rate in the country.
Yeah, but I have a lot of disputes about that measure because it assumes people are paying certain mortgages that you have. A lot of people are not, that are supposedly in poverty. They have a very low mortgage rate or rental rate depending on where they live. So there's a lot of disputes in social science about that poverty rate, and it's been not necessarily universally accepted.
Well, let's not get super in the weeds. Do you want to?
What's the overall strategy, though, from a political perspective, besides with the debate? I don't see that you've really given us legislature chambers or businesses about what the strategy should be given this runaway California. Because everything you guys said is really...
I'm actually going to jump in and answer that one. There isn't a strategy. The fundamental problem with the business community is it's transactional. And it's about self-interest. So when you try to pull together multiple industries in one direction, that's hard to do unless it's impacting all of them. And even when you try to pull together a single industry to fight something, you have outliers. No, I'm not saying it's not effective. I'm just saying it's not the monolith that labor is, that environmental. I mean, they, for the most part, with some examples, stick together. So it's a harder lift to have a single dominating strategy.
Can I just add, I think there are some glimmers of light, and I think they give some idea of maybe some tactical things that can be done to have more enlightened policies in the state. One of them is charter schools. So here in Los Angeles, you now have a majority on LAUSD who's pro-charter school. And that's really helping underprivileged kids get a better education. So there, the folks who are a little more critical of unions can be really on the side of a progressive cause. I live in the East Bay of the Bay Area, and I can tell you that in 2013 we had the BART strike, and nobody could get to work, and that really shifted political opinion towards the right. We have in Walnut Creek, which is again right in the Bay Area, we have a Republican assemblywoman. And the state senator is a very, very moderate Democrat. So I think that, you know, when they overstep, you can often find opportunities to point out that some of these pro-union, highly progressive policies are just bad for the general public and gain support.
I'd also point out, as I mentioned earlier, that the State Chamber of Commerce has been remarkably successful in killing the bills that it labels as gives the job killer label too. They've killed 90% of those bills over the last 20 years, and that continued on in this legislative session, despite its very liberal tone. They still killed the vast majority. I only think 2 or 3 reached the governor's desk, and I think he vetoed one. I think maybe 1 or 2 actually made it into law. They started out with 26, and 1 or 2 made it into law. So, and they did that basically by cultivating that mod squad of moderate Democrats. That's where that's the sweet spot for the State Chamber of Commerce. Those people exist. Again, you will not find their influence in voting records, but the influence is definitely there and exerts itself on these kinds of issues that are most interest to business. They don't stop all the bills. They didn't stop the minimum wage bill, for example, but about 90%. It's not a bad.
I mean,
I got my baseball tie. If the Dodgers can hit 90%, 900, they probably win the World Series, right?
Assemblyman?
I'll just be real quick. I mean, I guess it just depends on the specific issues that affects the business community. You know, there's an initiative on PAGA reform that's going to be circulated soon. So I think that's something that, you know, if there's probably going to be some pension initiatives. If the Supreme Court does rule in this court case that says that you can't use union dues for political purposes, it is a game changer in California in terms of from a political standpoint. If you're looking from a legislative plan in terms of, you know, we probably, in short term, we as Republicans and probably the business community are going to have to figure out a way to build a healthy two-party system in this state. So get out of the supermajority or superminority, win 2 seats, 1 seat in the state Senate, 2 seats in the state assembly. The polling, depending on where you're polling, right? I've seen the polling in all our target races in the assembly. The numbers depend on where you are. In San Fernando Valley, it's different from Santa Clarita, it's different from Fresno, it's different from Orange County, Riverside. And so depending on the issues that you poll, it changes. I mean, gas tax, environmental costs, when you put, I've never seen a poll actually, and I saw this in Riverside, where if you insert and tell people costs of living, costs of environmental compliance, costs of gas tax, every single moderate declined to state in one poll shifted. Went from 20% support to 0. I've never seen that in a poll before. Now, will that continue and sustain? I don't know. But there is data that says that there is messaging and that the issues that will benefit the business community, that issue matrix is probably more likely in 2018. Now, going back to the enthusiasm and everything else, turnout, if it's a base turnout where it's our base versus their base, you know, maybe it favors us. And if we can win those seats in the state legislature, then there's going to be some checks and balances, and then we got to figure out redistricting in 2020 and the new seats in 2022. But from my perspective, you know, it depends on the region you're looking at, right? If you're polling in the Central Valley, if you're polling in Riverside, it's different from the polling data in, say, in Los Angeles or San Diego. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, I'm going to jump to another question. Jessica?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the Upland Supreme Court case from this year that has to do with local taxation and the ability for maybe perhaps now city councils to place local taxes on the ballot when it's not an election of city council members, or the ability for them to perhaps pass taxes now without going to the voters if it was a citizen referendum, they collect enough signatures. Perhaps in Mark's neck of the woods, folks will get sick of taxes on different items from soda to Netflix to cannabis.
Yeah.
How, you know, is there an appetite for all of that down here, and how many more things do you think our local governments are going to come to?
I've actually been looking at that quite a bit because I am doing this research on the effect of pensions on city budgets. And if you look at, there were a number of tax elections in California, actually, local tax elections, sales taxes mostly. And most of them won, actually. But as you know, there's a differential in the law between a special tax and a general tax. And special taxes require 2/3 vote of local voters, and general taxes only require a simple majority. That's small. And so the Supreme Court decision seemed to say that an initiative that didn't go through a city council or a board of supervisors, but an initiative, special purpose tax could be passed with a simple majority vote of the voters. It seemed to say because it was not exactly on point, but it's kind of been interpreted as saying it might happen. So what's going on around the state is this. These cities are getting hit with huge bills from the pension programs, big 14, 15% a year increases, and on infinitum, on into the future. And they're very hesitant to go to voters and say, pass this tax to pay our pension bill. And in fact, when they've kind of
I'd like to
tried
see that
it's-
campaign, jeez.
So what's happening is that what they're hoping in some of these cities is that their local police and fire unions will now go to the voters and seek these special taxes that will be paid to pay for the pension bills. Not ever say pensions, more police and fire services is what they say, with only a simple majority vote. I was talking to one city manager whose special tax lost by 13 votes last year, and he's very interested in that strategy. That way, you don't leave any fingerprints on it from the city. City council doesn't have to do it. They don't have to bear the onus of asking voters for more taxes. And police and fire, face it, are very popular people with voters, very popular people with voters. So that you will probably see in next year's election the first tentative tries at doing initiative for special purpose taxes, i.e. police and fire pensions, through the initiative process. But it's not absolutely certain that it's legal, because the court case just kind of hints it might be legal, but doesn't absolutely say it is legal. But you'll see it next year. And if it's successful and it turns out to be legal, you will probably see a lot more local tax measures on the ballot by way of initiative rather than through city councils or boards of supervisors.
Let's come down the panel.
Just want to say something about the legacy techniques for extraordinary tax increases. So a nearby community in Contra Costa County to where I live is Moraga, a very, very affluent community. They just declared a fiscal emergency. That gives them the ability to put a special sales tax increase on the ballot before November 2018. Over a dozen cities have used that technique over the years since 2010. Also, you get the B word coming up. So in Antioch, a large city in Contra Costa County, the chief financial officer said, well, if we don't put a special tax on, we're going to go into Chapter 9 bankruptcy. So there's a lot of things that officials can do to scare voters, even if they don't get this support from the courts to make the threshold lower.
I'll tell you, this pension thing is, you will see more cities in bankruptcy in California in a few years.
Dan?
Vallejo may make its second trip to the bankruptcy court, not too distant future.
Dan, we're running out of time.
All right.
Susan?
Well, I'll just say quickly that it will be challenged in court, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a voter initiative to close that loophole.
I agree.
Well, I like it. One thing to look out for that no one's talked about, we just saw it in November, is the formula that was under the county Measure A, the Parks measure, which is basically a backdoor split roll, so that it doesn't even have to take advantage of these new potential avenues for getting local taxes. You do it the same way, but you do a formula where most voters are paying nothing, and yet large businesses and large landowners see their charges, for example, for parks, go up tenfold. So that, I think, we're going to see it definitely in LA County again and again to pay for any new good ideas. Let's do one last question. This gentleman's had his hand up for a long time.
I wanted to ask Mr. Walton, because a number of years ago, may have been 10 years ago, I asked a question at a forum, it was a Republican meeting, and I bemoaned the demise of the California Journal and their rankings of good, not so good legislators on a variety of different issues. And you said, but it doesn't matter anymore because they're all just ciphers. You have to follow whatever the party tells you to vote. So it's kind of irrelevant to try and rank good legislators
you want me to leave the room? Present company.
I think this is going to sound a little strange, but I've been in the Capitol, covering the Capitol for longer than God's been alive, 42 years, ever since Jerry Brown was inaugurated for his first term. That's a long time. And I would say, and have written, as a matter of fact, that the corruption quotient of the Capitol has gone down. The intelligent quotient of the Capitol has also gone down during that period. Which sounds contradictory, but really isn't. And I don't think the quality of legislators is as high as it once was. I think the intellectual quality isn't as high as it once was. And the independence level is not as high as it once was. They do march and rote. There's not as much independence within the legislature as there used to be. Part of that's term limits. You know, it's one of the effects of term limits. I can argue term limits 50 either way, but it's one of the effects of term limits. There's not the overt corruption that I used to see back in the 1980s that finally resulted in an FBI sting investigation. But there's kind of there's not much creativity or abstract intelligence either. It's more of a kind of by the numbers operation than it used to be, and that's a shame. I mean, it used to be a very intellectually stimulating place. There were really smart people there, and they were it was going on. It was like a debating society in many cases. Not anymore. It's kind of by the numbers. Committee hearings used to be they would really talk about the issues involved in committee hearings. Now it's like, who's for it, who's against it, A roll call, B roll call. Not really consideration of the merits of the bill within the committee process used to be. So I think that that's unfortunate, because California needs a better and more responsive legislative operation, not a more robotic one, which is I think what we have now.
Okay, since that question was directed to Dan, I'm going to take over here because we're closing out. I'm going to give each panelist a last minute to, you can talk about what Dan just answered or anything else, and I'll start with the Assemblyman, and we'll go on down the line.
Well, I might as well quickly add some context to what Dan says. I don't necessarily disagree with his assessment. I think we'll say, though, that with the longer term limits now for a lot of us who are now in a 12-year class, I think that hopefully that will provide us the ability to gain more expertise and to work with our colleagues and have a little bit more of a give and take. I think the other thing is that it is very difficult to get people to run. And so, people are in different places in their life. It is a real sacrifice to whether it's financially or time with family. And so to get real good people to run, sometimes I believe this adage completely, that the best people don't run. And so it's a thing. And so for a lot of us, we're trying to get the best people to sacrifice for public service. And so we need talented people and to bring them back into the building. I just in closing, I want to thank you all for participating. I think that we do have our challenges ahead. I think Dan's bill ideas of things that we haven't done are very, very important. I'm carrying the biggest CEQA reform legislation in the state right now in the Assembly. We focus a lot on, in terms of CEQA, we focus a lot on exemptions. We want to exempt the stadium. We want to exempt a lot of things, but we never focus on process and the big things, whether it's PAGA or CEQA or pensions. Those are not things that will happen overnight, and so we have to figure out a way to develop those relationships, as Dan mentioned, and figure out how we're going to. There could be more 6 to 8 year efforts. And sometimes you don't want the state legislature to move on a dime. Sometimes you want us to take time to get the policy done right. And for some reason, it may be half-loafism, which is very, very true, or something else is that there's somehow we're rewarded for speed, right? But speed is not necessarily our friend when it comes to making public policy, because if you don't bring the stakeholders together, if you don't engage the business community, if you don't engage the local communities, then you're going to get bad public policy. And so while on the federal level, people complain that Congress moves too slow or doesn't get anything done, I would make the argument that we actually move too fast in Sacramento, and we probably need to do a little bit better job on oversight and checks and balances. So thank you again.
I would like to urge the business community in California to watch out for the dangerous blackmail that goes on in this state. When they come to you and they say, we're going to do this to you unless you let us do that to you, and you say, well, okay, go ahead and do that to us because we sure don't want you to do this to us, you're doing it to yourself. And that has to stop. That has to stop. You have the power. You are the economy of California. They are just elected officials. They work for you.
Amen to that.
I'm glad that this panel showed a lot of attention to the pension issue. At the Reason Foundation, I work on our pension integrity project. We've had some great wins recently in Arizona and Michigan, where legislatures have really made serious pension reforms, a lot more serious than the half swing that we did with PEPRA a few years ago here in California. And so I think California will have more and more examples from other states to look at to really get fiscally sustainable. So I think, you know, the nation is a laboratory of 50 democracies, and we have a lot to learn from other states.
And in your interest of finishing on time, and because I've dominated all the time already, I'm going to say nothing.
I think they're clapping in support of you, Dan. I actually think we're taking it the wrong way.
Just want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the panel. It's an honor to sponsor this, along with Clear Channel Outdoor and the LA Department of Water and Power. Let's give one last round of applause to our panel. Be sure to fill out those exit surveys. I kid you not. Stuart will hold me hostage until they come in. Again, Tavika staff or ambassadors in the room are at the registration table. The luncheon program begins at 12:45, so in about 30 minutes. In the meantime, make use of the exhibitor booths and make sure to return your bingo card to the registration desk, where you'll have a chance to win prizes, including a flight on Southwest, tickets to Southwest tickets, signed football for the Rams, tickets to Magic Mountain, and other prizes. Thank you very much.